Before we really get started, I'd like you to all to close your eyes. Just close your eyes and take a deep breath. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Now imagine that you were told that that might be your last breath. That it could be tomorrow, could be next week, next month, this year, but certainly within 3 years. Maybe you might get 5 from the day you learned this. That's what happened to me when I was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. This was in 2004, June of 2004, I remember very well. I experienced everything you might imagine, depression, frustration, anger, asking all the questions, why me, why now? What did I do to deserve this? And what do I do now? Very difficult thing to accept. What I did was start thinking about what's really important in life pretty quickly. And I think all of us need to think about that periodically. Is it family? Is it friends? Is it money? Is it the house you want to buy, the car you want to buy? All of the things that are tangible suddenly lose their importance. And what it gets down to is you want time, and you want quality time, and you'll do just about anything to get it. And that's really what this story is about. What I wanted was time with my wife and my family. I wanted to go fishing, which is important to me, hiking. I wanted to do some travel, see the things I hadn't seen. This caused me to create my own bucket list. It wasn't quite as exciting as the one in the movie, but it was a lot of fun for my wife and I to do. But what I found pretty early on was that I couldn't even accomplish a lot of the things on my bucket list. We took a trip to Bryce and Zion to see the canyons there. And I couldn't walk from here to the sound guy back there without gasping for breath. So I saw this mostly through my wife's eyes, who would walk to the edge of the canyon from the parking lot, come back with a description and a photo. She's not a very good photographer, so I have a fuzzy view of Bryce and Zion, believe me. I took what was probably what I thought might be my last fishing trip, and took off with my brother-in-law in a camper and an extra SUV to carry 42 tanks of oxygen. Pretty heavy load, actually. And we fished for about a week. Had to refill the oxygen twice. So it was quite an adventure. But you do what you have to do. And what I found is that from the time I was diagnosed, I wanted to make sure that I was living life the way I wanted to live it and on my terms for as long as I could. But I was running out of time pretty quickly. The prognosis for IPF patients is not good. Only 2% of IPF patients are able to get a lung transplant, and it's really the only treatment today. There's no treatment for the disease that's available in the U.S. There's no cure, and the cure certainly is a long ways off. There are some treatments that are in the pipeline right now that might be helpful. We hope will be helpful. But there are about 150,000 to 200,000 patients that have IPF at any one time, and 40,000 of those will die every year, and 800 will get a lung transplant. And of those, half of those won't make it past 5 years after their transplant. So I'm 7.5 years out. I'm one of the very fortunate ones. By all measures, I shouldn't be alive today, but as you can see, I am. And glad to be looking at the grass from the green side. So I'd like to tell you my story, and as I tell you my story, I'd like you to think about how you could have made my journey better, particularly from a digital perspective, but there are some other thoughts I have about things you can do that will be discussed even in the session right after me, related to support groups and advocacy organizations. So this story started in Squaw Valley at a conference kind of like this. I'd been accustomed to being a pretty healthy guy, exercising, running at that time, getting short of breath, but thinking I was getting old. And I took a walk after the first day's session, and after 200 yards, I was gasping for breath. I'd stop, go another 200, gasp again, and go back to the room rather than my 2 or 3 miles a day. And the next, later on that evening, I went up 2 flights of stairs. By the time I got to the top of the second flight, I was just almost ready to collapse. So something had obviously changed pretty dramatically from my condition before that. And so I got back from the conference, I went to my primary care doc. He says, well, I think you've got asthma, so I'm going to give you an inhaler. So I puffed away on the inhaler for a few weeks with not much result. And I went to my cardiologist, and the cardiologist said, well, I think you need another stent, Mike. So let's do that right away. So I went in and got another stent. And that didn't seem to be doing too much different. I went to a cardiac rehab class, and spent the first couple of weeks there watching others progress and me not progress. My oxygen saturation kept dropping far below the rest of them. So finally one of the nurses pulled me aside and said, we don't think your problem is cardio. We think it's pulmonary, and you should see a pulmonologist. So I did. It took a while because they're in short supply, unfortunately. But I got in, and it took a week, really, for him to diagnose me with IPF. And bedside manner was not his strong suit. He said, you have idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Well, I'd never heard of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. I didn't know what idiopathic meant. Now I know it means I don't know. I don't know what caused this, and I sure as hell don't know how to fix it. And he said, you know, there really isn't a treatment that I'm aware of. There really isn't a cure. And you probably have 3 years, something in that neighborhood to live. So you should go home and get your affairs together and live life the best you can between now and then, and come back and see me in 6 months. So you can imagine how easy that was to go home and tell my wife that I've got a disease that's incurable, that will kill me in 3 years. You can imagine telling your wife, your husband, your girlfriend, kids. It wasn't a lot of fun. But stuff happens in life, and I've learned to roll with the punches through most of that. In this case, I spent a couple of days feeling pretty sorry for myself and thinking about what the heck I was going to do and why this happened. But then I picked myself up and said, I'm going to live life the best I can, but I'm also going to be the most knowledgeable person around about this disease, because I want to take every action I can to make a better life for me, and if not for me, for those who follow me. So thanks to Al Gore and his invention, the internet, which I wasn't very familiar with at the time, really, I got all over Google. And I found the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation website, the Coalition for Pulmonary Fibrosis website, the National Institute of Health website, and a number of others. And I found some online support groups that were very helpful, all of which were very helpful. I learned that there were actually clinical trials going on with drugs that might help this disease. I learned that there were support groups out there, in-person support groups, and there happened to be one in Seattle, which was only a couple hours away from me. I learned that Ganesh Raghu, a doctor at the University of Washington, was one of the most knowledgeable people in the world on this disease. And he was right in my backyard. It's amazing what you could find in short order. And that was then. Today, it would have been much easier. So armed with all this information, I went back to this pulmonologist with no bedside manner and said, you know, there are some clinical trials out there. Why didn't you tell me about those? I've been told that I should get on the transplant list immediately, first thing I should do, because at the time it was time and grade that determined whether you got a transplant. Very different now. It's based on if you're sick enough to need it and healthy enough to survive it, are kind of the way they evaluate you today. But at the time, I needed to get on the list, and he hadn't even suggested it. So I just pushed him into referring me to the University of Washington for a lung transplant and to Dr. Raghu, which has served me well. With Dr. Raghu, I explored the options available to me, and they were pretty limited at that time. There was one drug, Gleevec, which is a blood cancer drug that's been very successful, actually created in Portland at Oregon Health Sciences University. So I talked to Dr. Drucker about that, the guy who created it, and he said, you know, maybe not. I talked to Mayo Clinic, who was running the clinical trial on it, and they said, well, you have to move here in order to do it. I said, okay, put that into my bucket of things to consider. There was another drug, pirfenidone, which was only available in a clinical trial in Japan at the time. And just about the time I was trying to make my decision, they discontinued the placebo because the actual drug was viewed to be working very well and the side effects weren't very much. But getting into the trial in Japan proved to be pretty problematic. I seriously would have moved there. I was at a stage where I was getting pretty desperate for a solution. The other one was Actimune, or interferon gamma, 1B, I think it was, which was in clinical trial at that point. And my doctor recommended that as probably the best course given all of the options that were available to me. So I went home and did some more research, and I found out that Gleevec, or that Actimune was available off-label. So I went back to him and said, well, if it's off-label available, why should I do the trial? I mean, I want to serve the next generation, but I want to also survive this. So I pushed, and he said, okay, I'll prescribe Actimune for you. And he was pretty confident that it was actually a drug that was going to work or had some promise. But it turns out within 6 months, they terminated the trial because not only was it not working, it was making some people sick. So that obviously terminated my personal trial of that drug as well. But interesting things you think about when you're asked to participate in a clinical trial. And I know that all of the drugs that you're bringing to market have to go through that process. So getting patients like me to be inspired to be in them is important. But as I said, I was desperate, and I would have done anything at that point. So I chose to do the Actimune off-label. Didn't work. The disease started progressing pretty rapidly. By the end of 2005, I was on oxygen 24/7. And really, I was still able to be physically active and get around, but not real well. I had a backpack with my oxygen in it. I took it everywhere, kind of like a badge of honor. I decided I was going to make sure that everybody knew why I was on oxygen so that I could tell them the story of this disease. In January of 2006, I was put on the lung transplant list. And on March 19th of 2006, I received a double lung transplant. which is a pretty extraordinary experience. Since then, I've had a few issues. I've dealt with coronary artery disease and more stents, prostate cancer, skin cancer, rejection, infection, and even an incident of septic shock. And I'm still here. I don't know why. No clue. But nobody said it would be an easy journey. So why am I still here? You know, I've thought about that myself, about what contributed to that. I think a big part of it was just a will to live. And I don't get depressed. I love my wife, love my family, love my work. I really enjoyed doing everything I was doing, and I had lots more that I wanted to do. I could give a lot back. I figured I owed somebody for the fact that I didn't do the clinical trial. So I'm trying to fulfill that obligation now. I think part of it is because of what I learned. I mean, if I hadn't done my own homework as a patient, I never would have found a path to a transplant, much less a path to the drugs that may or may not have worked along the way. If I hadn't joined a support group, I wouldn't have found those things. That was very, very helpful to me. And I've never been a touchy-feely kind of guy, which I always associated with support groups. But in fact, they were one of the most important things, I think, for me and for a lot of other patients in dealing with the disease like this, and for their family too. I owe a lot to the team at the University of Washington and family and friends and for their support. But I owe a lot to people like you also. I think you're a big part of the reason I'm alive. This pill box here makes me one of your better customers. This is a week's worth, and it's 34 a day, basically, is what keeps me going. I have pills to do everything: fight rejection, fight infection, make me pee, stop me from peeing, keep my legs from swelling. You name it, I've got it in this little box. About half of them actually do something that's to treat my condition. The other half do something to offset the side effects from those drugs that actually do something. So it's quite an adventure to manage it. But I think I want to thank all of you, because I know that you made a career choice when you got into this field, and I'm guessing you made that choice because you wanted to help people who have diseases or conditions that your organizations can help. And it's a profession that should make you feel good and make you feel proud, because you're making a huge difference for people like me. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. So I'm alive today because I'm one of the 2%. I'm alive because I got 2 new lungs on March 19, 2006. I'm alive because someone else died. That's hard to think about, even today. But I'm also alive because of what I learned doing the research that I described earlier. So here I am 7.5 years later, and because of the compounds that you've made, I'm still alive and kicking, and I appreciate that very much. So I understand I'm probably one of your more extreme patients at the center here, but I think my story is informative and somewhat instructive. Here's what I think, some of the things I think pharma can do to make life better for patients. One is to support the disease foundations, and I have a little self-interest in this, being on the board of the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation, but they are just absolutely critical part of educating patients and also of comforting them. I know when I was first diagnosed, I went to the Coalition for Pulmonary Fibrosis first because they had a better website, and that introduced me to a person there who had talked a lot of people through this disease, who understood it, and you could call, spend an hour or however long it took chatting with them. Programs like that are really helpful to patients, but the information that's available on the websites, the links to all of the clinical trials, current updates on research are just really important to patients because it gives them hope. And I think that's what these foundations are all about more than anything. It's giving patients hope and advocating for the patients, making sure that there's funding to do the kind of research that needs to get done to bring drugs to market. Second, and this is the weak link in the whole process for me. I described my experience with the doctor with no bedside manner, but even the doctor with bedside manner didn't have resources to help me. So not once did anyone give me a copy, something that showed, here's a normal lung, here's what your lung looks like, or here's what someone with your disease looks like. Here's what's going on inside your body. Here are the treatment options that you have. Here's what the research pipeline is that's coming towards you. All of those things would have been really helpful, given me hope. They might not have cured my condition, but they certainly, from a patient perspective, put you in the frame of mind where you're likely to do better than most, I think. I think attitude is a very important component here. So I think equipping the physician with the kind of information they need to help patients is really critical here. In IPF, a picture of a lung versus your lung would have been really helpful. Identifying the possible causes, like acid reflux, is something that they're researching may be causing or at least contributing to the progression of it. And if that's the case, that's treatable. I mean, you can get all kinds of acid reflux drugs, proton pump inhibitors, to solve that problem, which may push your window out further. So those things should be available, and they should be available like right now. All of this content exists, but doctors don't have the time or the inclination, I think, in many cases, to go find it on behalf of their patients. But I think you can help with that. If you've got a drug that's specific to a disease, either work with the foundations and they'll get that information to them, or get your information to those doctors and get it to them in a way where they can deliver it to their patients. I mean, we're in an electronic age. In my support group, I have people that are as old as 80 and as young as 50. It kind of strikes people right around 60 generally. But the older ones are as active on the internet, as tech savvy as the younger ones, generally speaking. And if they aren't when they're diagnosed, they are by the time they've been around 6 months in the support group, because they find out how much it can help them. So do whatever you can to get content in their hands. And arm the pharmacists also. I mean, I have a book. Each one of these pills comes with a pamphlet that I get from the pharmacist. And so I have a book with every one of these in it. And, I'm a fairly smart guy. I don't understand about half of what's in there. And I think most patients probably understand less than that. Just getting that information in a user-friendly or patient-friendly format would be a huge benefit. Just the headlines. You don't have to have, I know you have to provide all of the dirty details about the side effects, but give us the headlines about what this drug will do and what we should watch for, what other drugs we shouldn't mix it with, and what the major side effects are and what to look for. That's all people need, but they need to have it in language that is user-friendly. My book, seriously, is bigger than my pill box, And then give the patient some adherence apps of some kind, something that helps them stay on target with their medications. My adherence app is this box, because it divides it into 4 times a day and every day of the week. But, you know, I'm not around this pill box all the time. I forget. So how am I going to get reminded by that? This is my reminder. So my wife set this up so it has a really obnoxious, I won't play it for you because it'll scare the Jesus out of you, but a really obnoxious alarm. But it gets my attention and most of the time causes me to take the pills. But then how do you manage this box? You know, every one of these pills comes in a different cycle. They're prescribed by a different doctor. So I've got things coming in waves of 4 or 5 a month. So this Excel spreadsheet, which is actually a couple of pages worth, tracks every one of those drugs, talks about the purpose, talks about the dosage, who's the doctor, when was the last time it was prescribed, when's the prescription going to run out, when's the next one you need, and then what's the dose by time of day. Really helpful to me, but we had to create that. And I know some of this stuff exists now, but none of it's integrated. There's no technology associated with it. I mean, imagine for a minute that your Fitband or your cell phone could be integrated with your medication system and be the reminder and could tell you, you know, it's the little blue pill or something that describes what it looks like. Because my wife puts this box together for me. I have no clue what about 60% of those things are right now. But I'll go back, I fill it myself once in a while to refresh my memory. But very difficult, but it would be so easy to do. There's got to be an app for that. Anyway, I think you guys can make a difference for patients. Today, what am I doing? I'm living, I'm loving, I'm working, I'm having a great time. I'm giving back as best I can. I'm vice chair of the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation now, and I'm spending a great deal of time on that and finding it very rewarding and being able to help patients that way. And I run 3 support groups, 2 for pulmonary fibrosis patients and 1 for lung transplant patients. So I do get to see this through eyes other than my own, and these problems that I've described aren't just mine. But I'd really like to thank you for listening to my story and hope it prods you to think a little bit about things you might be able to do for patients in the future. And I want to thank you for all you've already done, because without you, I wouldn't be able to be up here. I wouldn't exist by this point in time. So thank you very much. Now, for those of you who still have your eyes closed, you can breathe now. And I'd encourage you to enjoy every breath, because you never. Thank you. Jeff and I would be happy to answer any questions if there's time.
There's time.
Is there time? If anyone has any? Yes.
I do. So did the transplants alleviate any of the problems that you had with,
IPF?
IPF?
Yes. Yeah, it's brand
So
new
they're
lungs.
all,
Yeah. It's new lungs, much younger than I am. They're actually the best part of me now.
of course, yes.
But it trades that disease for a new condition.
Absolutely.
And the new condition comes with lots of issues. You're always fighting rejection and infection. So it's maybe more of a battle in some ways, but the prognosis is much better. You know, I've had 7.5 years of good quality life, maybe 6 of that have been good quality life,
Yeah.
versus the 3 max that I would have had. And dying when you're not able to breathe is not a pleasant way.
First, thank you for sharing your story. That's just profoundly moving. I've worked in the industry for a long time. What strikes me, and I'm not sure I have a question here, but I'm just so struck by if you had not done everything you did and been so proactive, that you wouldn't be where you are today, literally. And it just seems that there's got to be a better way. Is there any thought you have about process in healthcare and how, you know, how to solve some of these issues of integrating the resources that are available for patients?
Sure. I mean, I think well, University of Washington gets the job done in spite of the fact that they don't have an integrated medical records system. So step one is to have that in the healthcare environment so everybody knows what your condition is. But I think for conditions like this, which are fairly rare, certainly not as rare as some, but there ought to be sort of an instant referral to a specialty center, because I think that's where people really get treated. And trying to make that happen requires the physicians to understand that and to support it. So how do you get that done? I think foundations can help a lot in that arena, and I think they have helped a lot. But so part of it is just getting the referral to the right center, and then the other piece is getting the information to both the referring physician and also to the center in a way that they can distribute it. I mean, that they ought to be able to look at their iPad, click on IPF, and up pops half a dozen things that they should be able to say, okay, you need to look at this, this, and this, and think about your care. It's all there. It's all available out there. So how do you get it to that physician at the right time? I saw somebody speak yesterday about getting it to in the right place at the right time. When the physician is making the decision, this was related to how are you going to sell more? But you need to match the issue, the patient, and the physician at the same time and get the information to them. I mean, you are the most important link here, I think, because you have the information. The physicians need the information, and the patients need the information. The physicians are actually the conduit. So you have to find a way to get it to them, or we have to find a way to get it to them so it can get delivered to patients. I don't know if that helps, but sure.
As a caregiver, was your wife actively involved in some of the support groups as well, and how did she find information and support?
Okay. Yes, she was very involved in the support groups, and she's gotten a little tired of them now because there's 3 of them, like too many. But particularly when we were going through it together, she was at every meeting, and we encourage caregivers, whether they're spouse or friends, family, or whatever, to come to the meetings, because even if the patient won't, because then they can get the information directly. And a lot of times, eventually, the patient shows up. But caregivers, I think, are a really critical piece of it. And we also have a caregiver sessions every once in a while in the support group where we break out just the caregivers, because a lot of their issues are not the same as the patient. They want to talk about their problems with the patient. The patient is their problem. So you really need to separate them.
One more.
Again, sharing your story with Israeli. In terms of clinical trials, like when you were looking through clinical trials, did you look at like the pharma websites themselves, or how did you find those clinical trials?
I found them on the NIH website, but that was a link from, I think, either the Coalition or the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation to the NIH. But then I looked at the pharma sites themselves.
And did you call the pharma companies, like, or did you just?
I didn't. The only one I called was Dr. Drucker about Gleevec, because I had a personal connection where I could get to him.
Okay.
But mostly I talked to the hospitals about it, that were running the trials, or the physicians or nurses that were coordinating them.
Thank you.
Okay. So